Canada and Mexico striking an 11th-hour deal with President Trump, narrowly avoiding a trade war. While Trump is delaying tariffs against them, his tariffs on Chinese goods went into effect today. China now hitting back with its own economic retaliatory measures. And while several Republican lawmakers are praising Trump's tariffs, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul is sounding off on them. And he joins us now to talk more about this. So you posted on X on Saturday, Senator, the following. Tariffs, you said, are simply taxes. Conservatives once again united against new taxes. Taxing trade will mean less trade and higher prices. We put that yesterday to the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro. Here is his response.
It's a drug war, not a trade war. And anybody who's talking about inflation right now is dishonoring the men and women and children who have died at the hands of Chinese, Mexican, Canadian fentanyl coming across our borders. That's what this is about.
What do you, Senator, say to Peter Navarro?
You know, tariffs are taxes, and anything that increases the cost of a good will ultimately increase its price. Now, generalized inflation or a generalized increase in prices is caused by debt and the Federal Reserve buying the debt and a devaluation of every dollar. But individual prices going up in areas where there are tariffs absolutely happens, and it actually does affect trade. If you look at the farmers right now, there are still people in Congress wanting to give them a bailout from the effects that tariffs had in 2018 and 2019. When we put tariffs on China, China quit buying as much of our agricultural goods and our farmers suffered. There are still people in Washington today wanting to subsidize them for the harm they felt from tariffs. So the best way to look at tariffs is the seen and the unseen. You can see the steel workers you might help, but you don't see the 80 workers who buy steel for every one worker making steel that suffers from higher prices. Without question, tariffs raise prices and aren't good for trade. As leverage and negotiation, of course, the president was the ultimate negotiator. He did get Mexico to send some troops, and he got Canada to step up their patrols. So as a negotiating weapon, absolutely they have value as long as we never enact them when they are a disaster for trade and for the consumer.
With all due respect, Senator, and good to have you on the program. Thanks for being here. I didn't hear your direct response to Navarro from the White House saying this isn't a trade war, this is a drug war, he said. And he referencing your tweet and your take on these tariffs by saying that you're dishonoring the men and women and children who have died at the hands of the Chinese, Mexican, and Canadian fentanyl coming across our borders. To that, you say what?
Yeah, it's kind of a ridiculous statement to say that people who are against tariffs are for the fentanyl trade, because it's just not true. Everything we can do to stop the fentanyl trade from Mexico and Canada, we should try to do. Part of it is them allowing it to come through. Part of it's the fact of in Mexico, about a sixth of Mexico isn't even under the control of the government. So I do applaud the president for pushing Mexico into saying we'll put troops on the border and the Remain in Mexico policy will be in place. All of those are a good thing, and I think we're all on the same side on that. But tariffs as an economic policy are a disaster for the consumer, mean higher prices. Even if the tariffs are only on China, the average price that the consumer will pay is about $1,000 more. So every American will be $1,000 less rich because of these tariffs.
So the Wall Street Journal editorial board is also not a fan of the Trump tariff strategy. He actually made mention of that yesterday in the Oval Office. He disagrees with them. But here's what the editorial board wrote after the deals were struck with Mexico and Canada. They said, quote, Trump blinks on North American tariffs. The president pauses after minor concessions from Canada and Mexico. President Trump never admits a mistake, but he often changes his mind. That's the best way to read his decision Monday to pause the 25% tariffs against Mexico and Canada after minor concessions from each country. Do you agree? Do you believe these were minor concessions, or were they more than that?
Even though I'm not a big fan of tariffs, I think he actually did have a successful, and their victory is for Trump. He's gotten the lawless part of Mexico. He's gotten a promise from the president to send 10,000 troops up there. That is a huge win. We now have troops on our side. If they have troops on their side, we can take what is a lawless area and hopefully bring law and order to that area. So no, I think that's a huge win for him. Even though I don't agree with the economic benefit of tariffs, I do think he did use the negotiating leverage to get something good. I just hope we can stop with the victory and not put in place a tax that is not beneficial to the American consumer.
I mean, have you already seen a direct impact in your state? I know the governor has, appealed to the Kentucky delegation there in Washington saying, help us out. I mean, specifically the bourbon industry has come up, $9 billion, 23,000 people.
Right.
What's your warning on that front economically?
We are still suffering from some of the effects in the bourbon industry from the last go-round of tariffs. Europe responded to that go-round and raised tariffs on bourbon, and it did affect our international bourbon sales. But we also make a lot of cars in Kentucky, and the car manufacturers buy steel. Price of steel going up hurts the car manufacturers. So we have a lot of international shippers. We have people sending packages around the world to a person. Almost all of our major industries in Kentucky come to me and say they don't want tariffs because trade has made us wealthier as a state and as a country.
You know, I heard the Canadian Prime Minister the other day encouraging Canadians, if the tariffs went into effect, to, instead of buying Kentucky bourbon, buy Canadian whiskey. And with all due respect,
that would be a downgrade. Those are fighting words, and that would be a downgrade. Nothing better than Kentucky bourbon. I don't want to hear any of that on Fox News now.
I was going to say, with all due respect to my former countrymen, one of my formative experiences was going over to my Uncle George and Aunt Esme's every Sunday for dinner when they would make Manhattans with Canadian whiskey, and it's somewhat different.
And even if you were just a kid, you probably got a little bit for medicinal purposes, right?
No, it was just the smell. That was enough.
Okay.
You need a few more maraschino cherries in that Manhattan. Thank you so much, Senator.
Needed some bourbon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Appreciate it.